All right, music fans, welcome back. It is Dave, the Real Music Observer, observing real music in real time for real people, just like you right there, and just like me right here. Tom Johnston versus Michael McDonald. Uh, it's the age old question for Doobie Brothers fans. And typically there are two camps. I'm actually from the camp that believes both camps are good camps to be in. As a guy who kind of lived the Doobies and went back and really got into their music right from their debut album in 1970 with the single Nobody, which got redone, by the way, in 2010 for their album World Gone Crazy. And I liked the updated version a lot, but the original certainly is amazing. But that original album didn't do well, okay? It was Toulouse Street and The Captain and Me. Those are the albums that really ignited that sort of bar boogie R&B, hard rockin' at times, but also acoustic and sort of folky and bluesy, all that stuff. I mean, the Doobie Brothers were kind of like the American kitchen sink. I mean, everything was in there. Uh, it was just a really good mix of music. But Tom Johnston inevitably began to have some serious health problems and actually had to pull himself off of a tour the band was doing. I want to say probably around the time of Stampede or slightly before that. And Stampede comes out, Johnson can't go out on the road. Jeff Skunk Baxter, who's in this group now, who had helped them out on some other tracks prior, who's a great guitar player, brilliant guy, and also a defense specialist as well, missile technology guy, believe it or not. I mean, he's a true Renaissance man. He more or less says, hey, I know this guy from Steely Dan, and he'd be great for this band. And talk about a shift, though, from this bar boogie kind of style to this more almost straight up R&B and soul thing, which Michael McDonald brings to the Doobie Brothers on their album Taking It to the Streets, where Tom Johnston is still on this album. He sings on Wheels of Fortune, which is one of my favorite all-time Doobies tunes. It just kicks some serious booty. And there are other tracks on there as well that, as a Doobies fan, it's almost like the two worlds collide on Taking It to the Streets. You've got the Michael McDonald tracks, you've got Taking It to the Streets, and It Keeps You Running, and then you've got, everybody else, too, is involved with this album, and tunes like Rio. You've got to go back and listen to it, because it's really a super album, and it doesn't get a whole lot of, accolades. But McDonald continues on, living on the fault line, the classic Minute by Minute, one step closer. And then the band breaks up. And then they get back together again with Johnson for Cycles, which is back to your China Grove era Doobie Brothers bar boogie with a little more gloss for the 1980s. And then Dangerous comes out later. And they've been going strong since, with Tom Johnston and Pat Simmons guiding the way. But as a guy who kind of can see both ends of this, both of these singers have incredible talent, just merit as far as their version of the Doobie Brothers. And I guess I'm still slightly more partial to the Tom Johnston version of the Doobies. Tom Johnston's solo album, the first solo album, the album which was very R&B oriented and everything. It's called Everything You've Heard Is True, and I guess it's answering all of those rumors that were flying around. There's a great interview on YouTube where Tom Johnston is talking with Dick Clark, and he more or less says, hey, I liked the music they were doing. It's good music. It's just not the music I would be doing if I were in the band and they wanted to move in that direction. So certainly cutting Tom Johnston free, because he was still sort of hanging around up until Minute by Minute. He had some involvement even on that record. But then once One Step Closer came along, definitely Tom Johnston is not on that record. That's a Michael McDonald, Pat Simmons, straight up R&B, jazzy, fusiony. Has some really great guitar work and stuff on that album. But for the old school Doobies fans, this was as far removed as anything. Tom Johnston reestablishes himself with a couple of solo albums. Then there's about, a 5 or 6 year hiatus, and then they come back with Cycles. And since then, it's kind of been more or less the Tom Johnston version of the Doobies. Michael McDonald does make occasional appearances with the group, which I think shows the maturity of everybody and how they all get along fairly well. And look, both guys have tremendous talent, and I'm not sure what your favorite version of the group is. I like them both, and I like the Tom Johnston version just a little bit more because I love those early albums. I love Stampede is one of those albums too that you need to listen to because it's just so good. The production, the music, and there are a lot of songs on there that got some radio airplay, but they weren't killed on the radio. So when you hear them, a tune like Sweet Maxine, for instance, it's just going to bowl you over. Neil's Fandango, one of my favorite records by the Doobies of all time. So that's my spin. I like them both. It's very diplomatic of me. And, you can convince me that the Michael McDonald Grammy-winning Doobies is a better thing than the Tom Johnston version. And I'll listen to your argument and I'll tacitly agree with that. But for me, musically speaking, I'm more into the Tom Johnston sound because I think Tom brings some of that R&B with him, but he also brings the bar boogie, the bluesy stuff, and I think he and Pat Simmons have just more in common than Pat Simmons did with Michael McDonald, although Pat Simmons did sort of conform to that style in the late 70s and early 80s, and his album Arcade, his solo album, has a lot of that, hey, I took this from Michael and ran with it type of quality. Check out the tune Sue Sad on that album by Pat Simmons, and I'm sure you'll see what I'm talking about. All right, that's my video. It's Michael McDonald versus Tom Johnston. Maybe nobody wins. Maybe Tom Johnston wins by a hair. You make the call. I'm Dave, and I am the Real Music Observer. I'll be back to observe more real music in real time for real people, just like you right there, and just like me. And we'll do it really soon.